You've probably seen someone take credit with a smile while the person who did the work stayed quiet. Maybe it was in a meeting, maybe it was in a family, maybe it was small enough that nobody called it stealing. In 1986, that kind of silence became the center of a federal courtroom in Honolulu. Margaret Keane and Walter Keane stood before a judge because for years, the world had been told one story about the famous paintings with the enormous eyes. Walter said they were his. Margaret said she had painted them. So the judge gave them a test that didn't need a speech. 2 blank canvases, 2 people claiming the same art, 1 simple question. Painted here, in front of us. Margaret picked up her brush. In 53 minutes, she finished a painting in the style that had made the Keane name famous. Walter didn't paint. He said his shoulder hurt. That is the scene this story turns on. Not a theory, not a rumor. A woman with a brush, a man with an excuse, and decades of stolen authorship suddenly sitting in the same room. The question is not only who painted the pictures. The harder question is how the world believed the wrong person for so long. Long before that courtroom, Margaret Keane was not a public fighter. She was a painter. She was born in Nashville, Tennessee in 1927, and she had been drawing since childhood. Later, she studied art and moved through life as a quiet, observant woman whose work often focused on faces, especially eyes. That detail matters because the eyes were not a marketing trick Walter invented later. They were part of the way Margaret saw people. In her paintings, the faces looked still, almost frozen, but the eyes did the speaking. By the early 1950s, she was divorced, raising her daughter, and trying to build a life in San Francisco. She was not entering the art world as a powerful celebrity. She was a woman with talent, responsibility, and very little room for failure. Then she met Walter. They met at an outdoor art market in 1953. Walter was confident. He talked easily. He presented himself as an artist, a man with charm, stories, and the kind of public energy Margaret did not seem to have. In 1955, they married. At first, the arrangement could look practical. Margaret painted, Walter sold. She was quiet. He was comfortable with strangers. He knew how to stand near a wall of paintings and make people listen. There is nothing automatically wrong with that. Many artists need someone who can sell. Many quiet people partner with louder people because the louder person can open doors. But the danger starts when helping you speak becomes speaking instead of you. The paintings started appearing in places like the Hungry Eye, a San Francisco club where people could see the wide-eyed children and women that would later become a cultural phenomenon. Picture the room, people drinking, talking, looking at the strange little faces on the wall. Walter is there, explaining, charming, making the art feel like a story they can buy. Margaret is not the center of that room. That is the first crack. The public saw the paintings next to Walter's voice. They didn't see Margaret's hand. And in stories like this, the gap matters, because the person who explains the work can start to look like the person who made it. The break didn't happen all at once. According to accounts later given by Margaret, she discovered that Walter was selling her paintings as his own, not as a partner, not as a manager, as the artist. Think about how physical that moment is. A painting she had made with her own hand is hanging in public. A buyer is being told a different story. The work is right there, but the truth has been moved out of the frame. When she confronted him, the explanation was not, "I was wrong." It was closer to, "It was too late to fix it now." If they told the truth, people might be confused, buyers might be angry, there could be lawsuits. That is how a lie becomes a system. First, it's a choice. Then it's a problem. Then the problem becomes the reason you can't tell the truth. The signature made it easier. The paintings were signed Keane, one name, 2 people. To a buyer, it looked clear enough. To Margaret, it was a trap. Her own married name sat on the canvas, but it did not bring her into the light. It helped hide which Keane had done the work. And the work exploded. By the 1960s, the big-eyed images were everywhere. Originals, prints, postcards, posters. Critics often hated them. The public bought them anyway. That made the situation harder, not easier. Because now the lie had money behind it. It had customers. It had a brand. And it had a man who knew how to talk. Walter became the public artist. He gave interviews. He sold the emotional story of the paintings. In one famous Life magazine profile from 1965, he presented himself as the man who could paint eyes like no one else. Margaret was still there, but not in the way that mattered. She appeared beside the story, not inside it. In that same public world, she even played along. She reportedly said she admired Walter's genius. Now stop on that for a second. The woman painting the work was publicly praising the genius of the man taking credit for it. That's the kind of sentence that can look irrational from the outside. But in a controlling system, people often say the sentence that keeps the room from exploding. They learn which truth is too expensive to speak. You've probably seen a smaller version of this. Someone smiles through a meeting, a dinner, a family photo, because correcting the story would cost more than enduring it. At home, according to Margaret's later accounts, the pressure was not just public. She said she painted for long hours, sometimes up to 16 hours a day. She said the studio was kept closed even from her daughter and household staff. Time later reported her account that when Walter left the house, he would call every hour to check that she was still there. Those details need care. They come from accounts and journalism, not from a camera sitting in the room. But they matter because they show how the pattern felt from the inside. A closed door, a ringing phone, a painting finished under someone else's name. And when the work was criticized, even that came through the wrong person. When a major piece connected to the Keane name was attacked by critics around the New York World's Fair period, the public argument was about Walter's taste, Walter's art, Walter's failure. But the hand behind the canvas was Margaret's. So she was trapped in a strange position. She carried the labor, he carried the public identity. Praise missed her, criticism missed her too, but still hit the work she had made. In 1965, the marriage ended in divorce, but the public story did not end with it. That is another uncomfortable truth. Leaving a person does not always free you from the version of reality they built around you. In 1970, Margaret finally told UPI that she was the real artist behind the paintings. Then she challenged Walter to a public paint-off in Union Square in San Francisco. A simple test again. Come paint, show people. Walter did not appear. Instead of proving he could create the work, he attacked her personally. The fight moved from authorship to character, which is often what happens when someone can't defend the facts. But even that did not fully end the story. Years later, after more public claims, Margaret sued. And that is what brought them into the Honolulu courtroom, where the judge stripped away the interviews, the brand, the confidence, and the arguments. Just paint. The easy explanation is that Walter was a better salesman and Margaret was too shy. That explanation is too small. If this were only about shyness, the courtroom test would not feel so powerful. If this were only about sales, the signature would not feel so disturbing. And if this were only about money, Margaret's later statement about wanting legal victory more than cash would not matter so much. This story is not only about a loud husband and a quiet wife, it is about coercive control, a pattern where one person limits another person's freedom through pressure, fear, dependence, isolation, money, reputation, and control over what other people believe. That does not mean we diagnose Walter. We don't need to. The useful point is the pattern. Look at what kept repeating. Walter controlled the public story. He stood between Margaret and the buyers. He turned the shared name Keane into a mask. He framed the lie as something too dangerous to correct. He became the person the public believed because he was the person the public could hear. And this is the scary part. Control doesn't always sound like a threat. Sometimes it sounds like someone else explaining your life for you. That is the quote to remember. Sometimes control doesn't sound like a threat. Sometimes it sounds like someone else explaining your life for you. There is also a second layer here, psychological ownership. In plain language, it means that when you create something, you can feel that it is part of you, not just property, not just income, part of your identity. So when someone takes credit for your work, the wound is not only professional, it can feel like someone has reached into your life and renamed a piece of you. That is why the courtroom test matters so much. It did not just prove who had the skill, it reversed the whole arrangement. For years, Walter had the voice and Margaret had the hand. In court, the hand finally became the evidence. Margaret painted in 53 minutes. Walter did not paint. And there is one more detail that makes the story harder to dismiss. According to reporting, Walter had once asked Margaret to teach him how to paint the big-eyed style, but he could not reproduce it. So the public had believed the person who could sell the work over the person who could make it. That is not just an art scandal, it's a warning about how easily confidence can be mistaken for truth. The jury awarded Margaret $4 million in damages. Later, the money was overturned on appeal as excessive, though the core victory still mattered. Margaret said she didn't want the money anyway. She wanted the legal victory. That sentence changes the ending. Because this was never only about cash, it was about having the world stop calling another person's voice by her name. By the time that happened, years had already been spent. Interviews had already been printed. Buyers had already repeated the wrong story. The victory was real, but it did not erase the cost. It gave Margaret something more basic: a record, a ruling, a public answer to a private theft. Most of us won't end up in a federal courtroom with a blank canvas in front of us. But the mechanism is familiar. Maybe you've seen it at work. One person builds the idea, fixes the details, writes the notes, solves the problem, and stays quiet in the meeting. Then someone else presents it as if it came from them. Maybe you've seen it in a family. One person carries the invisible labor, schedules, meals, emotions, repairs, reminders. Another person receives the public credit for being stable, generous, or in control. Maybe you've seen it in a creative project. Someone writes, edits, draws, organizes, or holds the whole thing together, but the person with the louder voice becomes the author in everyone's memory. This doesn't mean every unequal spotlight is abuse. It doesn't mean you should diagnose the people around you. It doesn't mean every confident person is stealing from someone quiet. But it does mean you can pay attention to one question: who is allowed to speak for the work? Because credit is not always vanity. Sometimes credit is proof that you still exist inside what you made. That is why Margaret Keane's story lasts. Not just because of the paintings, not just because of the trial. It lasts because the courtroom made visible something that often stays hidden. The person doing the work can disappear while the work itself becomes famous. And that can happen in a home, a company, a relationship, a family, or a creative partnership. The warning is not trust no one. The warning is more specific. Notice when someone else's voice becomes the only official version of your contribution. A name on the canvas did not save Margaret. For years, the name was part of the confusion. What saved her finally was the chance to put her hand back in front of the story. So maybe that's the question the story leaves behind. Where in your life are you calling it humility when your voice is slowly being removed from your own work?